Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Today's topic is a Lost Mine of Phandelver Dungeon Master Guide. Don't even bother starting with me. I know I said I would stop making Lost Mine of Phandelver Dungeon Master Guides, but this question came up and I realised I hadn't answered this question and it was quite an important question. So yes, I've made another one. So the topic for today is travelling outside of the Lost Mine of Phandelver. Okay, this is when your players decide to go away from the locations that are detailed in the adventure book and they decide they want to go and do something else, and that can always create a whole lot of hassles. Now the things I want to talk about in this video is I want to talk about the reasons they do this, some of the issues that will be created for you, and how to solve those problems. So let's start off. There are about 3 reasons that players have their characters travel away from Phandalin and outside of the locations detailed in the adventure Lost Mine of Phandelver, and it's usually to go to one of the cities as it happens. For those of you who are wondering where they might want to go, it's usually a city. So the first reason is to buy stuff, particularly magic items, armor and weapons. But in some occasions it'll be because you have set limits as a dungeon master in Phandalin for the type of weapons, or in particular the type of armor they can buy. It might not even be magical items or magical armor or weapons. Maybe plate armor. Full plate armor tends to be one of those things that dungeon masters will say, no, you can't purchase it from Phandalin and you have to go somewhere else. So of course they start saying, well, we want to go to a city. So there's part of the reason. Number 2 is bored with the current story or the game. And I don't want you to get too upset about this as a dungeon master, because I'm going to explain what's going on here as well, and it's not the end of the world. Number 3 is people wanting to explore an urban location or simply wanting to explore something else outside of the adventure. It may have nothing to do with the adventure itself being good or bad, but simply they want more scope, more freedom to go somewhere else. So some of the issues that will crop up for you as a dungeon master. Players wanting to go to the larger cities, usually along the Sword Coast. These will be places like Neverwinter, Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep. Now the problem with this, as you might have already guessed, is there's nothing in the adventure really on any of the cities in the adventure book. There's no detail, and really you can't expect a beginner adventure like this to have that kind of detail. That's far too much information to incorporate in a tiny little pamphlet that's essentially just over 30 pages. So as a result, it would be unreasonable to expect that kind of detail in the adventure book anyway. I have had my own issues when I started running this adventure. I got quite annoyed that there was not enough information on Neverwinter. Then I did some research on Neverwinter and I realised why they didn't do it. You could prepare extra material on the cities, or you might decide to not even bother, depending on how much time you have available and your level of experience. Those are sort of some of the factors. I mean, essentially, if you want to get around this, going and doing extra prep is sort of the solution. But you don't necessarily have to do that, because there might be something else going on here that has nothing to do with having lots and lots of copious material that you need to use to deal with that sort of travel, or even outside of the cities to other locations. So how do you deal with these issues? We're going to start off with number 1. Number 1 is relatively simple, and I actually came across it myself. It was actually something that I was not expecting not to happen. I knew it was going to happen, in fact. Players wanting to buy mundane items is really not an issue. If you don't have those mundane items, stuff that's in the player's handbook in Phandalin, then just let them go to one of the cities if they have the money and buy what they want. That is never going to be a real big issue as far as I'm concerned. The biggest hassle for you is magic item shops, because magic item shops create a few complexities for dungeon masters around how many magic items they should have, essentially should you make them available to purchase? It's not really something we do in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and that's sort of a concept going right back to older versions of the game. So magic item shops aren't really necessary in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and the adventure is already absolutely packed with magic items, weapons, and not really so much armor, but certainly there are a few weapons in there that will help the players throughout their adventures. So you don't really need to have magic item shops. Now here's your other problem. Your players will not have enough money to buy magic items because you'll probably put quite a high price on magic items, and they will probably resort to stealing. That's usually what tends to happen. When you start resorting to stealing it with your character, bad things happen because dungeon masters put in consequences, which makes perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But there is a problem when your players don't understand that there will be a consequence, or they don't care that there is going to be a consequence simply because they decide they want the magic items, and if they can't buy them, they will steal them. So players' characters who steal are likely to get into a fight, particularly if they do actually decide to do that, because it would be weird to not have a magic item shop or a magic shop that has significant security, because who would not steal from a magic shop? I think it would be quite common for it to happen. So therefore, whoever's looking after their magic item shop, whether it sells sort of basic items or weapons or armor, will be making sure that they can't be stolen from. This is going to lead to character consequences, like them receiving fines that they can't pay, or they might be able to pay off, which is still a bit of a problem, being held in the stocks, tortured by the townsfolk, being thrown into jail, imprisoned in, say, a crow's cage or crow's nest of some kind, or winding up on the hangman's gallows and hung or drawn and quartered, or just basically executed in some way. Now, as a dungeon master, we're always trying to avoid those sorts of outcomes. This is sort of the worst case scenario for a dungeon master when they start to have to pull out those sorts of consequences. Now, who's likely to present these sorts of things to you? Who's likely to wind up wanting magic items in particular and resort to stealing? It's going to be your video gamers, so those people who are coming in from playing video games like Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, stuff like that, and now they're playing Dungeons and Dragons because somebody said it's a cool game and you should give it a go, or maybe they always wanted to play the game and now they have that opportunity. Also, the 3.5 and 4e Dungeons and Dragons players will simply not understand a lack of magic shops in the world. In fact, they're probably going to make quite a lot of noise, but don't let them make you feel stink for not including magic item shops in your world. There might be a very good reason. Magic items might be something that you really need to go to a private auction, and not everybody's going to be invited. It might be that magic items are so rare in your world that you don't just go and buy them, you actually have to go and find them. This is really sort of the concept behind magic items in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. You go and you find these magic items, you don't just go to a shop and purchase them. So what's my recommendation? I recommend not including magic item shops whatsoever in your world. Just don't put them in, and retrain your players' expectations. This is going to take some time. Don't expect all of your issues to be solved all at once, because they won't, but players can be retrained to think differently. You just have to take a bit of time and start presenting things in a different way. So now you explain that magic items are so rare, you have to explore and look around to find these things. You can't just walk into a shop and lay down your cash. So that was pretty much the first issue we needed to deal with. Number 2 is board players are not always a reflection of what the dungeon master is doing, but it could be what you're doing. And I'm not here to beat up on you with regard to you taking on the mantle, particularly for the first time as a dungeon master or picking it up after many years. That's not my job and not my intention. I'm just going to explain what's going on and how you can go about dealing with that issue. I want you to think about this. Could the players be tired from work or school rather than actually being bored with the game or the adventure? That's always a possibility. I found that to be often the case, particularly for people who can only play for a short period of time, a limited number of times a month. It's often a sort of a fight between life and Dungeons and Dragons, and they only have so much energy when they finally get to the game table. Are your Dungeons and Dragons players just really hard to please? Maybe their expectation of what they want to get out of this whole process is just a little bit unreasonable. You won't know at this present time, but you're going to find out. Could the Dungeon Master do something better? Is there something that you're doing in the game that would improve the experience? And when I say let's improve the experience, it's not about doing a lot. It may be simply about making slight adjustments. Is the Lost Mine of Phandelver the right adventure for the players? These are all questions. I know you're wondering, why am I presenting lots of questions? Well, all these questions have pretty much the same answer, and I'm leaving the answer to the end. So that's what you need to think about. Is the Lost Mine of Phandelver the right adventure for the players? If you've got somebody who's been watching Critical Role and is a fan and came into the game from watching Matt Mercer and the Critical Role team, are you dealing with a sort of an issue around player expectation? So are the players expecting Matt Mercer as their dungeon master? And if they are, well, there's something we need to talk about. Last, pretty much on our list of sort of things that you need to ask in terms of questions, did you have a session 0 at the very beginning before you started your campaign? Before you started running the Lost Mine of Phandelver, did you sit down? Did you take some time, it didn't need to be the whole session, and actually talk about the player's expectations and the Dungeon Master's expectations? Did you actually do that? If you left that out, that is going to create a whole lot of these problems as well. Certainly around board players and what they're expecting out of the experience. So what is the answer? Very simple. Like almost all YouTube channels, they will say, talk to your players and ask them these questions. That's why I've put these questions out. Okay, you go and you ask those questions and you get an answer for those questions from them. If they don't give you an answer, well, that's another issue in itself. I can't do very much about the issue of players simply not giving you feedback when you need it. Once you've asked these questions, then you have an opportunity to address those questions and deal with those issues. And there are lots of videos out there, because all these different topics and questions that I've talked about have multiple layers to them, okay? Otherwise, if you can't ask the questions, or you're not getting answers to those questions, or you're still completely lost as to what's going on and why your players are bored, my suggestion to you is change how you are dungeon mastering in some small way and see what happens. You do not need to make huge sweeps and changes to the way you run the game. You don't have to go and spend hours preparing. You do not need to become a professional voice actor. You do not need to study Matt Mercer hour after hour, or Chris Perkins, or anything like that. All you need to do is make some small changes that you think would improve the game and make it more interesting for your players as they are going through the adventure. That is it. Very, very simple. Okay, issue number 3. Players wanting to explore the cities or some other location might suggest that a different adventure would be a better choice. But there are some problems with this, right? It's all very well saying, well, should have run a different adventure, but Yet again, I'm going to present you with a whole bunch of questions, and near the end I'm going to present you with a solution that pretty much answers all those questions and deals with the issue. Are your players expecting too much freedom in your world? So much freedom, in fact, that you cannot deliver it. So you need to ask that question. That's the first question. What about, we were talking about different adventures. Would the adventure Waterdeep Dragon Heist be a better choice than the Lost Mine of Phandelver? Is that something they would be far more interested in? Yet again, going back to session 0, we should have established that way back then before you started running the campaign. Is the Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage likely to appeal to the players more as an adventure compared to the Lost Mine of Phandelver? So another question to ask yourself and feed onto the players and get them to answer those questions. Now, I would like to make it perfectly clear that none of these adventures that I've talked about, Waterdeep Dragon Heist or Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage, none of these adventures that I am suggesting are suitable for beginner dungeon masters, by the way. I'm sure there'll be somebody who will argue the point and say, I'm a beginner dungeon master and I ran them, but they are not designed for beginner dungeon masters. They are specifically not. They are hundreds of pages of material that you have to prepare and deal with. So as a result, not a beginner adventure whatsoever. So just because they might be better options doesn't mean as a beginner dungeon master they are necessarily the thing you should go and pick up. I would suggest leaving those sorts of adventures to experienced dungeon masters. You do not need to be Chris Perkins or Matt Mercer or anything like that, but you probably will need to have a bit of experience and you'll need a significant amount of time to prepare those adventures because they are hardback and they are thick. There's a lot of content in them to deal with. Another question to ask yourself, do you have the skills and desire to improvise your adventure? If they decide to go outside of the realm of the Lost Mine of Phandelver, can you deal with that? Are you prepared and willing and capable to improvise? If you are, then you can move forward and we don't need to worry about anything else. That's great news. Question to ask yourself. Another question. Do you have the time to create a homebrew adventure? Do you actually have time to sit down and prepare something of your own that is not the Lost Mine of Phandelver, that deals with wherever the players have decided they want to roam to? If you can do that, then great, there's an option for you. Okay, here's the last answer I have. Your solution, if none of the things I have talked about are going to work for you, this is the one you want to pick up. I would recommend to you to make it explicit to your players that you have sat down, you've spent time, you are running the Lost Mine of Phandelver, you talked about it in your session 0, you talked about it before you started running the campaign, and there are limits to what you can manage as a dungeon master. And I would say this is where beginner and new dungeon masters need to sort of sit. You need to sit down and make it really explicit to players who want to go and explore other locations and cities where you're just not capable of dealing with that, just not willing to do that, or just don't have the skill level, or it's just too frightening. Just make it explicit that you can't deal with that level of complexity. Not yet. Maybe later on, but not in your first foray, not at the first time you start dungeon mastering. Now, I'm hoping this video was helpful to people. If it was, fantastic. I have a playlist, a huge series of videos on the Lost Mine of Phandelver for Dungeon Masters. It's a Dungeon Master guide. You're welcome to go and check those videos out. It should cover pretty much everything you need. If it doesn't, someday I'm hoping I will cover all the things I'm supposedly needing to cover. But so far there is quite a few videos. If you aren't interested in the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but you're still looking for some sort of feedback from me, I have videos for players and dungeon masters covering every aspect of the game. You're welcome to go and see those videos if you want to. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing content like this, I have a Patreon page. I have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon if you buy stuff online, and I have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos. You're welcome to check those out. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live, and I go live a lot, and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.